Okay, everyone. I see a lot of
There we go.
participants joining. We'll get started in just a minute. There's a lot more coming on, but we do have Terry Baksay is going to be doing a webinar. And we just want to thank Bass Pro Shops for sponsoring this webinar. Looks like quite a few people are still joining. Okay, so it is time to start. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So if you're just joining us, my name's Tyler Brinks. I'm just here helping out, fielding questions for Terry. He's the one who's going to be doing the webinar. He's a 3-time Forest Wood Cup competitor and a 2-time Bassmaster Classic competitor. And he's going to answer all your questions on breaking down your lake for the spring. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them at any time. We're going to do a kind of a midway stop to answer some questions, and then we'll also get to them at the end. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Terry now.
Thank you, Tyler. That was great. I'm actually in a hotel room, as you can probably tell. I'm down in Atlantic City visiting a tackle store tomorrow morning. And we're going to talk a little bit about spring bass and how we, where you go about figuring out where the fish are going to be. That's a difference depending on where you live. It's different in Florida, different in Texas, different anywhere. Really, that's the number one thing is the water temperature. And a lot of I live in Connecticut, so our water temperature is like 44 to 45 degrees, and the fish have been biting pretty good, but they're not everywhere in the lakes. So you kind of have to, how to break them down. Our lakes are a lot smaller than a lot of the lakes that are around the country. So in the smaller lakes, what we do is it's essentially going by what the in-fishermen, I've always been a fan of the in-fishermen and what they do with the calendar period. So this would be like for me in the Northeast, this is early pre-spawn is what I would say. So that, even though we have a full moon coming up this Sunday, and a lot of places in the country, the fish are going to go on beds like crazy, but in the Northeast and probably across the northern part of the country, they're not going to. The water's just still too cold. We've had such a crazy winter that, it snowed just a couple weeks ago. So early in the season, you want to look for those areas which are, identify where they're going to spawn first, and then work backwards from there. And that's the most important thing, is trying to work backwards. And by working backwards, what you're doing is you have an area where you know that the fish bed, and a lot of the bodies of water, especially smallmouth, they don't have to necessarily go into a cove or go into a pocket or go into by some trees or something like that. They'll spawn right on the main lake. So what you can do is you kind of need to look for areas which are a little more protected. They'd like to be a little more protected from the wind and from the north wind and all that stuff. They would really prefer to be in an area that has a little bit of protection. Smallmouth especially, they want to spawn. They don't necessarily have to have gravel or any of that. They want to have something at their back. So it can be a rock, it could be one little twig, it could be really anything. Whereas a largemouth, he'll just spawn just haphazardly. If you have the right kind of cover, he'll just spawn right in the middle of a flat. He doesn't have to have something at his back. But smallmouth really like to have something at their back. So anyway, that being said, as I said, we're going to digress and go backwards. So the fish are, they're starting to look for places to bed. So what you want to look for is you want to look for areas that you have a deep water area where the fish are coming from. And that would be the wintering period, the cold water period. That's where the fish are coming from. And that's when last fall and last winter, you were catching those fish on blade baits. You were using hair jigs. You were using like swim baits, like Kitex, and throwing those on a little heavier heads and fishing anywhere from 15 to 30 feet of water. So what you want to do is you want to look for those areas where you caught them, and then look for the next shallowest area that they can move up to. Now, that doesn't have to be, it could be a distance meaning it could be a quarter mile, be a half mile. I don't think they go too far. Their wintering habits, their wintering basin areas usually are going to be near where they spawn as well. So you have a standard home group of fish that is going to be near every place that you think they possibly might spawn. It's just a matter of figuring out the highway that the fish are using. So usually I will go to an area that I know that they winter in, and what I will do is I will backtrack again and I will try to figure out, all right, where will they go to? Which is the nearest break line? So you try to find that break line, And normally on these bright sunny days that we've been having a few lately, and the water air temperatures gets up into the 60s, it'll move the water temperature closer to that magical 50-degree mark when I think the fish get pretty active, and you can catch them on a lot of baits. They're active now, but they're not as active as they could be. When they hit 50, they get quite a bit more active. And so these fish are going to move up onto that break, and that break is going to be anywhere from 15 to 20 feet. It could be 10 to 15 feet. And that's the first stuff that I look for. And early in the season, what we will do is I will take a swim bait and put it on like a 1/4 ounce or a 3/8 ounce head. So I'll use a, just so you can see here, I have some purchased today at Susquehanna Bait and Tackle in Pennsylvania on my way over to New Jersey. Anyway, this is a 3.3 Kitech, and the color that I have here is, these are two of my favorite colors. This one is called Shad. Read that color there, that name. And the Shad kind of has a silver glittery belly with a kind of a purple flake top. And that purple flake is really, really important for a lot of bodies of water that have shad in it, and especially the ones that have alewife in it, because alewife have an awful lot of purple in their back. If you take an alewife and you look at it, there's a lot of more purple in there than you would imagine. So that's one of the colors that I throw. And then the other one that I throw is a perch colored one, which is something that especially our fish in the north, they eat a lot of perch. And this will it can also be called bluegill. Looks the same thing as a bluegill colored bait. This one has a watermelon with kind of all different color flakes, especially some orange flake on the belly, and then it top's a little bit darker. And these baits, I'll get back to these also. We use these in a couple different ways as well. But this particular bait right here, throwing this on a 1/4 ounce, 3/8 ounce jig head, 8 in pen pound test, and just slowly winding it over the bottom, or actually suspended. The fish are going to suspend in the water column. And another bait that we use really, really early in the year is, is a jerk bait. Anything that I use, any of the, like a deep husky jerk, any of the Rapala baits that'll get down there about 8, 10, 12 feet. That's about the first bait that I'll throw, especially when the water's anywhere. I'll throw the spoonbill one, and then I'll go to a regular shallow lip one as the water gets a little bit warmer. The spoonbill baits, I throw them on a spinning rod because they're really hard to throw, because they tend to windmill when they're in the air, and they don't throw well. So one of the things that I do on a lot of those suspending baits is I'll take some storm suspend dots or suspend strips. I prefer the dots. And I'll put 2 or 3 dots at the very butt end of that jerk bait, right where the hook is, the last hook is. And I'll put them there, and I'll put 2 or 3 on there. Doesn't really affect the action of the bait. 2 or 3 doesn't bother it too much, but what that does, enables me to cast that bait. And so I want to be able to cast that bait out as far as I could possibly do. I reel it down a little bit, and then I will use a sweeping motion with the spoonbill. So I'm sweeping the bait and pausing it, and I'm reeling as I'm sweeping. And then when I pause the bait, I'm not using my hand on the reel at all. So you want to have your hand off that reel when you pause that bait, because if you move it at all, it defeats the whole purpose. The longer you let that bait stay there and not move, the better off you are, especially when the water is cold. So I'm throwing it out there, sweeping it as I'm winding it. And when I stop it, my hand's nowhere near that reel handle. And that's when you're going to get bit. The fish aren't going to move it when, they're not going to bite it when the bait's moving. They're going to bite it when it's paused. And the longer that you can pause, the better off you are. I use 8-pound test Suffix Fluorocarbon. I throw it on a pretty heavy spinning rod. And this is one of the things that I do that's different than most other people. I always use a snap when I tie my hard baits to my line. I always do. I take the split ring off because I don't like tying line directly to a split ring for a couple reasons. One, I think that I can always have a failure from tying my line to a split ring because the split ring has a couple of sharp edges on it. And if the fishing line is the most important thing that you're going to be using, then you want to be able to make sure that that's the most important link between you and the fish. So I use a snap, I tie the line to a snap, tie that to the bait. And as I said, I don't use the split ring. I take the split ring off of the jerk baits, and that's the way that I rig it. One of the neat things about doing that is that enables me to change baits. So if Tyler and I are out there fishing, and Tyler's catching them on, a purple lure with pink polka dots, and he's got another one and he'll share with me, though sometimes people don't do that. But if he'll share with me, then I will be able to go catch some fish, because I can just quickly take my lure off my snap, put it down in the boat, pick up that lure that he loaned me, and throw that out there and start catching fish. So I've always been a big believer in snaps. There's a lot more guys on the FLW and the Bassmaster Elite Trail that use snaps than you could imagine. If you jerk baits, a lot of them will use snaps. And a lot of it is ease of changing lures, but a lot of it changes the angle, because a snap's a little bit longer than a split ring, so it changes the angle that the bait dives in the water. I feel it gives it a little bit more action, but that angle will enable that bait, especially the jerk baits, to get down in the water a little bit more. So, excuse me for a second. I tend to talk a little bit fast, being from the Northeast, so bear with me. So essentially what I'm doing early in the season, I'm trying to find that break line that's right near of a spawning area. So that's where my Navionics chips comes into play. I run Raymarine electronics. I love my Raymarine electronics, especially the new Axioms. They are absolutely lights out, the best electronics that I've ever used in my entire life. And one of the neat things about them is we put the Navionics chip in there, and the view is great as far as what I can see. So I can find that little spot. And sometimes what I'm looking for this time of year is I'll look for a little bit of a flat. So in other words, I have the shoreline will go down, and it'll stair step, stair step, stair step. If I can find like a little bit of a wider stair step at that 10 to 15 foot range, that seems to be about the number for me where I start catching them early in the season. And that 10 to 15 foot range, if I can find a little bit wider area, like a plateau type area right there, those fish will gang up on something like that. And they could be on a boulder, they could be on a stump, they could be on anything right there. What you want to do is you want to be able to find spots like that, and you can mark them with your side imaging when you're going down the lake, and you can see a spot like that, throw a waypoint on it, and go back and fish that spot. And as I said, I throw a jerk bait, especially if the sun's out. If it's cloudy, I'm not going to throw a jerk bait quite as much. That's when I'm going to go with the Swimming a Kitech, or even throwing a blade bait or something like that. A hair jig. I tie my own little hair jigs. I tie a lot of marabou hair jigs, which I really, really like marabou. I know Seth Fighter likes them a lot up in Minnesota, and I've been using marabous for years in Connecticut, and we call them boos. And so that's one of the neat things that we do. We use 1/8 ounce and 1/4 ounce ones, and they look really, really nice in the water. Don't put any trailer or anything on them. I throw them on 6-pound test. But if I have a cloudy day, the fish are going to go a little bit deeper. They seem to go a little bit deeper early in the season. They don't move up with the water column like they will on a sunny day. So that's when I will do something, as I said, fishing a little bit slow. I prefer to power fish if I can, but there's times of the year that you really don't have to. So early in the spring, that's the first thing that I do, as I said, finding that little plateau, and then looking where the fish are going to go next, and then looking where they're going to go next, and then I just go from there. If you have grass in the body of water that you're fishing, that's even better. Even the leftover stuff the fish are going to suspend right over the top of that leftover grass. And that's really, really, really easy way to target those fish. If you have any rocks or stumps or anything in that grass bed, that's going to be a target that those fish are going to move up on as the water gets a touch warmer. That's be one of their staging spots before they move into the shoreline to go spawn. And they can spawn on something like that too, especially if that stump or rock is, relatively shallow where the sun will reach it. On some of the brighter, clearer bodies of water, it's a lot easier for the fish to spawn a little bit deeper. Even a largemouth will spawn in 5-6 feet of water, 7 feet of water. I've seen smallmouth at lakes like Winnipesaukee. I've seen them spawn in 25 feet of water. I would imagine like a Lake Mead or any of those really, really clear bodies of water, they're going to spawn deeper. I know the spotted bass at Lake Lanier, they'd spawn extremely deep as well. So if you have the water clarity, as long as the light will penetrate, those fish will spawn a little bit deeper than you think they will. Gosh, I talk too fast. Anyway, the next bait that I pick up when I'm trying to locate these fish, the fish have moved up onto this little plateau area. I'm describing something that it's kind of you could have a creek channel that'll move in there, and you'll have maybe a little, if you have a creek channel with one of those little plateaus that I'm talking about, come right next to it. Oh my God, that is absolutely the most perfect spot in the world. It's a textbook spot. In a lot of that area, just look it on your maps. And there'll be times when I will sit out in the garage and I know I'm going to a body of water. I'll pull up the map for that body of water and just sit there and just stare at it. And, maybe I'll drop a waypoint on a few spots that I want to go look at. I'll make some notes for myself that I want to go into, like this creek arm, or I want to go into that pocket, or I want to go here, or I want to go there. I'm still old school. I love my paper maps, but if you use the paper maps in direct correlation with like a Navionics now, it's amazing what you can do, because you can actually look at something that you're seeing on the Navionics chip, and you can find it on the map, and you can kind of discern it a little bit better, and then you can back it way out, which you can do on your Navionics, but sometimes on a paper map you can pick all sorts of stuff. So if you're picking out stuff on the Navionics chart, just transfer that to the maps, and you have some paper stuff to look at. I still use it, as I said, I still use a paper map. I know Mike Iaconelli and I are good friends. Mike uses a paper map an awful lot. I mean, I have maps for probably I'm not going to say every lake in the country, but I have just hundreds and hundreds of lakes of maps marked up. I mark all my maps, and a lot of that stuff, I have spots that I will sit there and I will put a waypoint on my Navionics so I can go back to that spot when I go in practice areas. So a lot of the guesswork can be done before you even get out on that body of water. And that's the key thing to this, is a lot of the work can be done beforehand. So the more you can do beforehand, the better it is. It just makes it easier, because, I have a degree in psychology. That's what I have a master's in psychology. I never planned to be a professional fisherman, but it just kind of happened. And one of the neat things that I talk to people about, especially when I do seminars, I talk about time management. I'm kind of a freak in my boat. I like everything labeled. I like everything to be exactly where it needs to be. And there's so much stuff now that makes it easier. Bass Mafia has all this stuff out there that, to keep your terminal tackle. Then they have stuff for your big crankbaits. They have stuff for your jerkbaits. They have those big plastic money bags now to put in just all the same type of bait. So if you're fishing, if you just want to put your trailers in there, you put all your trailers in a plastic bag. I like all that stuff. I like having it organized, because the faster that I can get what I need to get, faster I can tie something on, faster I can find something, the more casts that I can make. And the more casts that I make, hopefully the more fish that I can catch. And the more fish that I can catch, especially when I'm fishing in tournaments, the more money that I'm going to make. So henceforth, it all kind of steamrolls. So that's why time management is very, very important when you're on the water. Even down to the food and stuff that I prepare. I like to be easy and able to eat it quickly. And I don't eat while I'm fishing. I eat it when I'm running in the boat. And so you want to have everything at your hands and ready to go. So I mentioned, so when the water gets a touch warmer, then I go to throw in a shallower running jerkbait. So I'll throw one of the shadow wraps is one of my new favorite baits. Rapala came out with it a few years ago. The X-Wrap is probably my all-time favorite jerkbait. I've caught, I don't know how many thousands of fish on that particular bait. I throw a lot of the greenback silver-sided one. That's some of my favorite colors. Anything with blue with the silver on the sides, I catch. Some of the saltwater colors have been my kind of secret for years. I've used a lot of the saltwater colors that Rapala makes. They have 4 new ones that they just came on with that are really, really nice. If you are using them in freshwater, just make sure that you take the hooks off and put on and take the split rings off and put some freshwater terminal tackle on it, because they're just a little bit heavy. And then what I do is I put a feather on the tail of it. People ask, Well, does the feather matter when you're throwing a jerkbait? Feather doesn't really matter. What that does is it'll make it dive about a foot less. If you take the feather off and put a regular treble hook on there, it's not going to dive. It's going to dive a little bit deeper, about a foot deeper. So there's times when I will take that feather off if I need to get it down a little bit deeper. Sometimes I think the feather, though, really can trigger the fish. And there's even times when I will put the feather on the front hook of a jerkbait. It gives it a really weird look, and the fish will look at it and they'll be like, wow, that's pretty cool. What is that? So 8 to 10 jerkbait boxes, plain old 3700s in the boat all the time. And you're just full of jerkbaits, all different shapes, models, colors. Most of them are made to catch the fishermen as with these different colors, is for you guys to go out and buy them. But some of those colors are pretty cool. And there's certain bodies of water where one color will work, but that won't work anywhere that I fish over here. But yet, if I take mine down there, I won't get a bite on it. So you have to adapt to all these different bodies of water. So anyway, in the springtime, as I was mentioning, I go with those shallower jerkbait. And then one of the neat things that is out there is, cranking. I can talk about cranking for a half hour, but I don't have time to really delve into the whole thing. But if you're not throwing a storm wigglewort early in the season for early spring bass, you're really missing out. Now, I know there's the originals that you can get on eBay, and they cost $30, $40, $50. I buy those myself. But I do have a ton of them at home still. But the newer ones are really nice. They've done a great job with them. Rapala has done a great job with them. The colors are great on them. They sound really good, and I've caught an awful lot of fish on them. But a wigglewort, put it on a cranking rod. I throw it on a 6.5 foot cranking rod. I use 10-pound test fluorocarbon. I'm using a Shimano, Chronarch reel. I'm using a Spiralite rod, and I am just going down the bank and throwing that bait out and go through. It'll go through rock. It'll go through wood. It'll go through anything. But early in the season, that bait is the first crankbait that I will pick up. Another bait that I haven't really mentioned was a bait that was made years and years ago, and people don't talk about it. But down in the Carolinas, North Carolina, South Carolina, Lake Murray, Lake Norman, they throw a shad wrap all the time. All those Carolina lakes, Kerr Reservoir, they throw it an awful lot. We throw it a lot in the Northeast as well. And the same thing with them, as I mentioned with the spoonbills, I put a couple of ups, and you could throw that on 8-pound test. You could throw it a mile if you put a couple suspend dots on the back, because it doesn't want to throw unless you put some weight on it. So throw that out there and wide net in 8-pound test. You will catch a lot of fish. One of the newest thing that's out there, and it's been, oh my gosh, it's been around for quite a while. Brian Thrift kind of made it pretty famous, is a Chatterbait. And they have just come out with a new one the last year or so called the Jackhammer. Evergreen partnered with Z-Man, and they made the Jackhammer, and that is a Jackhammer. That is a 3/8 ounce Brett Height Delight, I believe. Brett's Delight, I believe that is it. I need glasses to read anymore. It's horrible. The Height Delight. Anyway, it's kind of a green pumpkin with some chartreuse in it. Absolutely the most amazing chatterbait that I've ever seen. Everything is done perfect on it. It has a perfect, I have one in my hand here. The blade is made so that the blade will hit the head of the bait when it's rocking back and forth when you retrieve it. It's got a decoy snap on it. It's got a Gamakatsu hook. Make sure that you take off this little red plastic holder that's on there. You can see that there's a little red plastic holder. That's what you need to take off. So take off that. It's got 2 little keepers on there, and those 2 little wire keepers will hold any kind of trailer that you want to have in there. This happens to be a 1/2 ounce one, and what's cool about that is on the bottom of the head, I don't know if you can see it here, but it says 1/2 ounce on the bottom of the head for people who get their stuff all mixed up and can't figure out what they have. There it is. It's 1/2 ounce right on the bottom. For a trailer on these, there's a couple different trailers. I mentioned the Kitex, the Swing Impact. This is a 3.3, awesome trailer this time of year because it looks like a bluegill. I like this because it's not too big when the water's cold, because it's a bait that I'll throw this time of year. I'll throw it on 15-pound test on a pretty like a medium heavy type rod, and just slow roll that on top of the grass or in the boulders or somewhere where there's rocks near the grass. That's where the fish are in the springtime. And I'll just roll that around the grass and around the rock. And it's amazing what you'll catch. When the water gets just a touch warmer, then I will go to the Yamamoto, and that is this color. This is a Zako. And what this is a green pumpkin / black blue laminate. This is a bigger bait, but it's a really, really great trailer, as are the Z-Man ones, which look exactly like this, the Razor Shad Z's, I believe. But this particular bait, that's it right there, fits great on the back of a Chatterbait. It's got little grooves on the top and the bottom, and it fits perfect on it. And then if you don't want to use that, I'll go back to my all-time favorite, which is the first one that I've ever used. If I fish up in Lake Champlain, I always throw the Speed Craw for some reason. I really like it up at Champlain. And this is a relatively new color. That's why I bought a bag today. It's called Sungill. So it's kind of got like a watermelon with green and orange, and it's got a little bit darker bottom to it. Should be perfect for throwing on the back of a Chatterbait and trying to imitate a bluegill. This time of year, that's what I'm really trying to do, is trying to imitate those bluegills that are down there, because that's where the big largies will do. They'll try to trigger on those bluegills that are starting to get a little bit active, and they want a bigger meal. The smallmouth, there's some crawfish down there for the largemouth in most bodies of water. If there's bait fish, they're probably a lot of the shad and a lot of the alewife will be a little bit deep, and the smallies might not be triggering on them, but the smallies and largemouth will both eat bluegill, and they'll eat perch this time of year as well. So any of those are really, really important. So early in the season, as I mentioned, as the water gets warmer, I'm throwing a shallower jerkbait now. I'm throwing a Chatterbait now. I throw a War Eagle spinnerbait, just a regular chartreuse in white with a silver and a gold blade right now. I'm throwing a Wigglewort right now. The Square Bill's coming up, and that's another bait that I'll throw early in the season. The Square Bill being like any of the different shallow running crankbaits. Rapala just came out with a bait called a Brat, which is a really cool bait. It's got a balsa body with a plastic core around it. You can throw it into anything, and I've been using them for about 6 months now, and they're really, really neat baits, and they have some great color combos in them. This time of year, I prefer something reddish, believe it or not, or crawdad, because I think that's what they're eating on. So when I'm throwing a crankbait this time of year, I prefer to do that. Even when I'm throwing a shad wrap, I prefer the crawdad colored crankbait this time of year. So crawdad is my color with a crankbait. In a jerkbait, I didn't even mention talking about colors, but anything with a green back, silver sides, or a blue back, I'll throw something like that. Occasionally, especially if it's a little bit cloudy out, then I'll go to something that's more bluegill or perchy with, something in greens, maybe some chartreuse in it, maybe with an orange belly on it. Sometimes that orange belly can really be a trigger for a jerkbait, especially early in the season. And I think that's why years ago, when the fish would, right about when they'd spawn and into the post spawn, that's why you'd catch them on my thiolate floating worm, because that little bit of orange really triggers the fish early in the springtime. But on a Chatterbait, I don't really throw a whitish one this time of year. I'm throwing more something, a green pumpkin or a black blue, or something like that Height Delight there that is green pumpkin and chartreuse. And I like to throw something like that that'll imitate the perch or imitate a bluegill, and really can trigger one of those bigger fish, especially when you need a kicker. I mean, a Chatterbait you've seen what everybody has done with it. People are winning. I mean, gentlemen just won down at Kentucky Lake, won the World Kayak Championship on it. So, I mean, it catches fish anywhere in the entire country. Reading about people out in the California Delta catching them on it. We all know that they catch them in Florida with it. I mean, it's an amazing bait. It skips real well. You can skip it underneath docks. If you haven't played with that bait, and I'm not sponsored by them, and I know Gerald Swindle, when he did the Bassmaster Classic, he said he had $1,100 worth of jackhammers. I don't have quite $1,100, maybe about $200 or maybe $250 of jackhammers, but it's a really, really good Chatterbait. As I said, I'm not even sponsored by them. Put your favorite trailer on the back, throw it on some pretty heavy line, and you can throw it in 2 feet of water. You can throw it in 20 feet of water. They have a 3/4 ounce version now. So you can get it down there where it needs to be. I'm sure the guys who are ledge fishing can't wait to get out there with a 3/4 ounce one to get it down a little bit deeper. So but anyway, we are going to take a break now for a minute or two, and then we'll take some questions.
All right, so questions, and like I said at the beginning, if you guys have any questions for Terry, just ask them at any time. So, Terry, first question, if you're ready. So,
Go
Dave,
ahead.
do you take the split ring off of the bait, or can you snap to a split ring?
That's a great question. I would prefer to take the split ring off if I can. There's certain baits like a shad wrap. It's really, really hard to do. Sometimes with the recessed eye, you cannot get the split ring off. You can do it, and I will do it. I'm not going to say I never do it. If I'm just practicing out there, I will do that. I will put the snap right onto a split ring, but I prefer to take a split ring off, especially in tournament situations. I will do that.
Okay, good question. So next question is from Luke, and he said, talking about your flats, does it matter where they are on the lake? Example, east, south, etc.
I don't think it really matters. That's a great question. Also, I didn't delve into that. It doesn't really matter as long as there's a spawning area near where those flats are located. Those deep water flats, like what I'm talking about, a lot of these fish, especially smallmouth and spotted bass, they love those deep water basins in the wintertime. And I know the spotted bass, they like timber and all that stuff, but a smallmouth especially, I mean, there's times when we'll put a camera down and we'll just see the smallmouth just laying in the mud in 40 feet of water in a basin. And those same fish, if you can follow them to where they go, those are some of the biggest fish that you're going to find, especially from those deep water flats. So anytime that you have a flat, if you can find any little thing, like I talked about, a rock or a boulder, boulders are a big, 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 big deal in the springtime. You can find a boulder that you can keep to yourself. You can catch fish off, and fish after fish after fish. It'll keep replenishing, and that'll be a spot as long as nobody sees you fishing it, or side images and happens to see it there. But if you can find a boulder that's holding fish, something like that replenishes, especially in the springtime.
Perfect. So another question is from Andrew, and it said, how do you approach the pre-spawn to spawn bite in Florida?
In Florida, those fish are going to be, they'll pre-spawn and spawn right in the same spot. The spawn areas, from what I've fished in Florida, I fished there a lot, and I love fishing in Florida. Anywhere there's arrowheads, anywhere you have that hard bottom, that's where the fish are going to spawn. They like to spawn right at the base of those roots. And those pre-spawn fish, especially if you have hydrilla in that body of water, the hydrilla is totally going to be the key to what those fish are going to do. And they're just going to use that hydrilla as a natural, road going right into where the spawning areas are. Look at what Chris Johnson and Johnston and Corey Johnston and I can't think of Gustafson's first name, from FLW. Yep. And when they fished in the Harris chain, they were fishing offshore hydrilla, very close to an area where those fish were going to spawn. And that's what the fish were going to do. If you have hydrilla in your lake in Florida, that's where those fish are pre-spawn. And those fish are probably there post-spawn. That's when they start schooling on the shad and stuff like that. So, and in Florida, my favorite thing for pre-spawn, I always tell people this: if you see a shiner stake, where the guys go out, the guys who catch shiners, and they use the nets to catch the shiners, if you see a shiner stake, you need to fish it. No ifs, no ands, no buts, because there's bass somewhere in that area. Because it'd be like putting you in the middle of a grocery store and saying, all the food is around that one little aisle right there. I mean, you're giving them the refrigerator, and you're giving them the key to open the refrigerator by using the shiner stake.
Cool. Next question is from Rick, and he said, which rig do you use for bed fishing, and do you use sinkers around beds?
My favorite way to bed fish is to use a Texas rig, yes. I use a Texas rig. I use a 1/4 ounce VMC tungsten sinker. I use a 3/0 offset shank VMC hook. I'm giving a blatant plug for that. And I use 15-pound test on a bait caster, because Clark Wendlandt made an impression on me a long time ago. We used to go out to Beaver Lake. Everybody's throwing a spinning rod, a 6-pound test, 8-pound test, trying to catch those big largemouth. And Clark's like, well, why bother to do that? The fish, you don't need to do that. You could throw that heavier line. You could throw in the middle of those cedar trees, and you can get those fish out of there. So I use a bait caster with, as I said, a 15-pound test. On the back of it, that speed craw that I showed you, that's probably my number 1 bait. My number 2 bait that I throw for a fish on a bed is probably a Zoom centipede, which nobody throws anymore, but oh my gosh, is that a great bed bait. That is a really, really good bed bait. And then the lizard, you know, it's been on the fish. Lizards, sometimes just an old-fashioned green pumpkin lizard will really, really catch them. But my first choice for color-wise, a red bug in the Zoom centipede. For some reason, they love it all over the country, everywhere I've ever been. And I throw as I said, a lizard, green pumpkin lizard. And then in the speed cross, something watermelon with red flakes, watermelon green flake, watermelon orange flake, something like that.
Great. So a couple more questions. So we have Dante said, what's the best thing to use in Connecticut waters right now for bass?
Probably a jerkbait. If I had to pick something, I would throw a jerkbait. That's by far the number one bait out there right now. Something that's going to dive about 4 or 5 feet deep. Throw it on 10-pound test on a spinning rod or a bait caster, and you want to throw something that looks like a minnow, something with a silver or whitish belly, going up to green sides or blue sides, and that's the first thing that I would throw right now. And that usually should catch them. If the days are cloudy, the fish are not going to bite that jerkbait as well, because a jerkbait is more of a sight bait. They need to be able to see it. So that's when I'd go to something like a crankbait this time of year, like a wiggle wart, a crawdad-colored wiggle wart, or a crawdad-colored square bill, something like that, as the water gets warmer.
Okay. Jason asks if you have any special considerations for ultra clear, non-grass bodies of water.
First, I'm sorry, because that's about the hardest. Well, I wish I know what body of water he was talking about. Like, it would help quite a bit.
Yeah, Jason, if you want to just say the lake or state or something like that, we'll jump to the next one, and then we'll go there. So just go and do that, Jason. We'll get to that. So the other one is, what water temperature do you think largemouth lock on beds in the Northeast?
I think a lot more has to do with the moon than with the water temperature. I've always been a believer in that. I've seen largemouth spawning at 52 degrees. I've seen largemouth spawning at 70 degrees. So I think that I think anytime above like 57, 58, 59, you should be looking. I mean, we have a full moon on Sunday in Connecticut. Water temperature is probably going to be 52 to 53. There'll be smallmouth spawning somewhere in our state this weekend. I would imagine a lot of the small ponds. I have a pond right near me that I go fish all the time, and I guarantee you those fish will be on beds this weekend. So the smaller the body of water, the faster it's going to warm up. Some of the bodies of water, like just to give you an idea, like a Silver Lake or like a North Farms Reservoir for a couple of bodies of water, Patchogue, Mamanasco and Richfield. All of those bodies of water are shallow bodies of water. They have a lot of the black muck bays. That's where the fish are going to be. They're going to find some gravel in there, and they're going to go spawn on this moon. Fish will be on beds somewhere in the state. Maybe, obviously probably not on Candlewood, and not on Little Knowers or any of those. We've had a little bit too much rain, and the last two are running a little bit too much because they're kind of river lakes. But I would say that they will be on beds somewhere this weekend. And then the next time, you have the new moon. The new moon is really, really good. The new moon in May, those smallmouth will be spawning everywhere in our state, probably in a new moon in May.
Okay, we have several more questions. Do you want to just save those for the end, or do you want to just keep going with questions?
Keep going.
Okay, so Frank says, what do you look for on a map to locate spawning areas?
First thing I do is on the map, I want to look for an area where I think that they're going to winter. And then I will look for the spot that they're going to spawn. And then what I'll do is I'll try to intersect those two places and find kind of the natural channel which those fish are going to use to go to that spawning area. If you notice, a lot of the bodies of water, they'll have creek channels in them. Up in the Northeast, we don't have a lot of creek channels, but when I fish down south, I've loved fishing creek channels. And we have a creek channel that will run right in next to a spawning area. That bank where that creek channel runs next to the bank, right before a spawning area. I'm thinking of a place on Pickwick Lake right now that I absolutely slaughtered them about 15, 20 years ago. It was every cast with a crankbait. And those fish were just loaded up. You had a channel swing, The channel swing swung right in on the bank. You had a little bit of rock on that bank. You had 2 or 3 big stumps. All you had to do was hit a stump with a crankbait and you'd get a bite. And during the tournament, those fish, the water got warmer. Those fish all in that spot where I thought I was going to kill them, they moved into that bay and they just scattered. And you were able to catch them on a rattle trap. Now, I didn't figure that out until probably the afternoon of the first day, but then I ended up catching them pretty good. And I think I got a pretty good check in that tournament, if I'm not mistaken. But it was probably the best pre-spawn spot I've ever seen in my entire life. It was like they were stacked up like cordwood. So use your map, find your deep water basin, find where they're going to spawn. So you have the 2 areas. They can be close. They can be a little bit far. I don't think, as I said, half mile probably. I don't think they're going to be much farther than that. And try to intersect them and see what's there. Creek channel bend, it could be a little bit of a subtle point. Sometimes if you look on a map, you don't have a point that's on the shoreline, but if you look out into the water on the map, you'll see that out in that 15 to 20 foot, there's a point there, and they'll make a little flat on that point. Those fish will stage on that spot. And that'll be one of the early pre-spawn spots where they'll sit at. So they'll sit on that little spot there, and then they'll kind of mosey up to the shoreline and then just kind of use the shoreline to go down. And if you know a brush pile that's near there or a stump or something like that or a rock, that's going to be something that's going to catch them on that highway that they're going into their spawning area.
Perfect. So another Frank asks, how do you feel about the new Rapala Rip Stop?
The Rip Stop is probably one of my most favorite jerk baits that they've ever come out with because of the way that it actually stops on a dime, and that is pretty neat. I fished it a lot last year. I got some of the early prototypes and I was fishing them for smallies. Throw it on a spinning rod because it is so light. There is I'm not supposed to say this, but there is a bigger one coming out this year, so there'll be a next size up, so it could throw a little bit better, because the small one, the one they have now, is really hard to throw except on a spinning rod. So anyway, the colors are really phenomenal on it, but I actually caught so many fish because the smallmouth, they love to follow the bait. So I'd throw it out there, jerk it along a grass edge or jerk it along some rock piles, and the smallies would come up at it. And when they'd be following it, and all of a sudden you stop it, and usually your bait will kind of go forward, your jerk bait will move forward. That bait will actually stop on a dime. And I noticed it an awful lot when I was fishing it in the like at Bass Pro Shops, or when I'm doing it, some of the tank demos that I've done this year. I live in Connecticut, so I'm right near the Bridgeport store, and they let me come in there and play with some of the lures. So I'm throwing the Rip Stop in there, and there's some trout in there that are just ginormous, 6, 8, 10-pound trout. And the trout and the bass would be following it, and all of a sudden I would give it a sharp jerk, and I'd just stop it, and all those fish would almost run into it because they were used to moving with them. But you could actually stop that bait on a dime and let those fish actually just they would annihilate it when they ate it. Last year when we had in the summertime up at Lake Champlain, we had fish along this one grass edge, and it was unbelievable how many fish that I could catch on that Rip Stop. It was the right depth. It did everything they wanted to do. My X-Wrap that I normally throw up there, they didn't bite it as well. And that Rip Stop, especially some of the colors, they have like a whitish one with a bluish sides that I've caught an awful lot of fish with. And there's a perch colored one. If you live in a body of water that has perch in it, that particular color is really, really, really good. But I throw it out on 8-pound tests on a spinning rod, just like I do in the spring. But they have a bigger one coming out. That one's a 9, I believe. That's the one they have now, and they're coming out with a 12. So that 12 is going to be awesome. That's going to be probably one of the best jerk baits on the market when it comes out.
Okay, going back to that question about clear water with no grass. Jason said it's Laurel River in Kentucky, 58 to 60 degree water temps. He's had a little bit of luck with wacky rigs and a blueback, a Ruku shad, a rattle trap, I believe.
If the water's 58, 60 degrees, you have fish that'll come up and eat a topwater that time of year too. And if they won't eat it, I'm assuming you have some that's smallmouth, mostly smallmouth, some largemouth, probably some spots even. And there's a lot of times when you're fishing really, really, really clear water, you could throw a jerkbait and you could throw a topwater. And what you're trying to do is you're not trying to necessarily catch those fish. You're using those baits as a bird dog. So I will use a bright colored bait. I know when we went down to Cumberland Lake a few years ago, I was catching them on a pink and chartreuse jerkbait. It was an Old Storm thunderstick that I was throwing. And I had some painted up. I had some Megabass 110s painted up in that chartreuse and pink. And oh my gosh, the smallmouth were just absolutely annihilated. So when they wouldn't eat it though, I would actually see where the fish was. So I was using the top water or a jerkbait kind of to find where the fish were. And then I could turn around and throw something like a tube or throw a drop shot or throw something like that in there, or a Senko or something as a follow-up bait to where those fish are. And that's a lot of things that I do, especially when I'm fishing like Lake Winnipesaukee, New Hampshire is like that. It's really crystal clear. And there's no grass where the smallmouth are. There is some where some of the smallmouth are, but most of the smallmouth, there's no grass. And so you're, especially early in the season, you're bombing these really long casts with a jerkbait or with a top water, finding where the fish are, and then you go back there and you just throw a tube out there or throw a drop shot out there, and you can catch those fish. And it's pretty easy. So try something really, really bright to trigger those fish, to get them to come up and look at it, and then you can go back and catch those fish with something different.
Okay. We have another question from Rick, and it's what's the best approach on Lake Berryessa in California? Senkos? ?
That lake is one of the better. I know it has some great big fish in it, and I know guys throw a lot of big baits, like big swim baits. And what I think you probably should do is just sell all your tackle that you have, go buy a couple of those Roman-made mothers that they have out there for $500, and that's all you need to do. Get yourself a couple of big rods and reels, and just go be like Mike Long and go out there and just try to catch one that's as long as your leg. No, I'm kidding. Senkos, everybody throws a Senko. I love Senkos. I catch a lot of fish on them. There's other stuff that those fish will bite besides the Senko. They'll bite a drop shot. They'll bite a Senko that you rig wacky style. The Nico rig has really revolutionized a lot of the Senko fishing, putting a weight into the end of a Senko and hooking it in the middle and just throwing it out there and fishing it in 30, 40 feet of water. Those big fish down there have never seen anything like that in that deep of water. But I mean, Lake Berryessa it's, as I said, it's known for, it has some big fish in it too. So I would think that throwing a Senko, there's other ways to catch them besides throwing a Senko or throwing a drop shot. A lot of people in California, I don't hear about them throwing the tube anymore. The tube used to be Bobby Garland started to gets it out there. And try throwing something like that. Try throwing a gets it, rig a gets it in the middle and put a weight in it and try throwing it like that and see what you catch. Some of those bigger tubes that are out there, those 4.5 inchers, hook one in the middle, put a weight in the head of the bait, and just throw that out there and let it go to the bottom and just shake that around and see what you catch instead of throwing a Senko out there.
Cool. Got lots more questions. So Greg says, sorry if I missed this, but do you use a Carolina rig much?
I love a Carolina rig. Carolina rig is one of my absolute favorite ways to catch fish. More so for smallmouth, being as a lot of the tournaments that I fish, when we go down to Kentucky Lake or Pickwick or any of those bodies of water, sure, I'm going to throw a Carolina rig down there. But I throw a Carolina rig. I like that. I mentioned the Ultra Vibe Speed Craw. I've got a ton of them. Zoom doesn't sponsor me either. I throw that on a Carolina rig, 3/4 ounce tungsten sinker, 15-pound test. I was with my sons fishing up in Lake Champlain last year in August, and we absolutely slaughtered a smallmouth fishing in 20 feet of water or so with a Carolina rig. They'd come up and look at a jerkbait, but they wouldn't commit. You could throw a drop shot down there and catch some, but you were catching a lot of little ones. Throw a Carolina rig down there and they would swallow it. It was absolutely ridiculous how many fish. So a Carolina rig, people don't throw it enough, I don't believe, but I always have one rigged up. I mean, there's one rigged up right now in my boat. Even though the water temperature is probably not even 50 degrees, I have a Carolina rig rigged up for when the largemouth get pre-spawn. There's times when I can fish that inside weed edge, and boy, you can catch some really good largemouth with it as well.
Great. So we got another California question. So with the floods on the lakes breaking levees, followed by big drops in water levels, what would your approach be?
A lot of those fish are going to suspend, and you got to look at what bait that they have on those bodies of water. I mean, I'm assuming there's I know they eat salmon out there, kokanee. Some of the bigger fish do. Smelt, I'm going to assume, is probably rainbow smelt is probably also a forage. Some shad. So, those fish are going to suspend and they're not going to go far from the groceries. The bad part about all that stuff is water levels falling and rising. When you're trying to have a spawn, you can actually have like no spawn for that year. So that year class is going to be kind of messed up going forward. But those fish are going to suspend an awful lot. So that's a lot of vertical structure is really good. So fishing stuff like bluffs, bridge pilings, something that's a vertical up and down. Suspended on boat docks is also a really, really good pattern when the water goes up and down. We have a lake near us that goes up and down like that. Not as much as yours does, but it does go up and down. And a lot of the vertical structure, that's when we really, really catch them on the bluffs is probably the best part. And those fish will spawn on the bluffs. And if the water's clear enough, although with all the rains and stuff, chances are it's really not. But they will also spawn on those bluffs too. They'll find like a little ledge or something like that and spawn right on them. And they can also spawn right into marinas. Some of those, some of that stuff that's underneath the water, they'll spawn on top of that.
Okay. Charles asked, do you consider wind when fishing a new lake?
Early in the season, the windier the better, in my opinion. This time of year, pre-spawn, I like wind. When I'm fishing a new lake, yes. I like to fish in the wind. I don't like it when it's calm. Unless I'm fishing like in the fall and I have to vertically fish for the fish, then then it can be calm. But when I'm fishing early in the season, even in the summer, I like wind because the wind usually makes the fish active. And the more active the fish are, the easier they are to catch, especially because I'm a power fisherman. That makes it a little bit easier. If it's really windy, it's very hard for the guys who go out and flip all day long to really be successful. But if I'm out there throwing a chatterbait or a spinnerbait, I'm usually going to catch a lot of fish.
Cool. So we have actually two questions from Dante. So I'll just do them both at once. So he says, he has 50-pound spider wire braid on my bait caster, which I know is overkill, but what is so bad about having line that is heavy if it's so thin? So that's the first question. The other question is, what are some of the best spots or lakes in Connecticut? He's been to 4 places and hasn't been catching anything.
A lot depends on where he lives. As far as Lake Candlewood, Lake Little Noah, the Connecticut River is really, really good. A lot of the lakes in the southeast part of the state, i.e. Rogers or Amos, Patchogue are all very, very good right now. Going out towards the western part of the state, I mentioned Mamanasco and Richfield is really, really good. Ball Pond and New Fairfield is really, really good right now. All of those lakes are very good right now. As far as the braid, the problem with the 50-pound braid is it is thin, but it doesn't get down in the water column as far as you need to get it down. I mean, I try not to have braid on any rods except I use braid on I use braid on every single spinning rod that I have, and I tie a fluorocarbon leader to it. And I usually use a 12 to 15 foot fluorocarbon leader, a little bit longer than most people do. I tie it on with a double uni knot, and you need to practice on that knot if you want to learn how to tie, because it's not an easy knot to tie, especially in a boat. It's not. And as I'm getting older and need my cheaters, it's a little bit harder. So I try to tie it perfect at home, and that way it's ready to go. But I use that braid. I use bright fluorescent braid so I can see the braid a little bit better, and I can see when I get a bite sometimes when I'm fishing slow, looking with a drop shot or a tube or something like that. The only time I throw braid on a bait caster is if I'm throwing a frog over pads or slop or any of that. I like the way that a braid can walk the. I use 65-pound suffix to throw a frog. The Terminator popping frog is probably my favorite frog that I throw, and that's the only time that I throw braid. I don't flip with braid. I use fluorocarbon. I think that I get more bites if I'm using fluorocarbon. The advantage for using like 50-pound test like you're using is you can throw a lot of the bigger stuff. When you get to the lighter baits, it's really difficult to throw some of the lighter jerk baits and lighter crankbaits and let them actually act the way that they need to. So scale down a little bit if you want to have braid on your bait caster. I mean, the most that I would probably put on there is 30. So even going down to 30, but I would tell you that if you could put fluorocarbon or even monofilament on it, that's what I would do first.
Perfect. So the next question, any location advice for moderately stained water ranging between 60 to 65 degrees around Dallas, Texas? We're having difficulty locating and catching bass.
Around Dallas. Well, you're not too far from Lake Fork, not too far from Richland Chambers. Trying to think of some of the other, Tawakoni is down there. Ray Hubbard is down there. All of those bodies of water, I mean, right now those fish should be, I mean, it should be lights out down in Texas right now. I would imagine that all of those fish should be biting spinnerbaits really, really good. Chatterbaits, shallow crankbaits. It's just a matter of just covering water down there. Look for the northern parts of those bodies of water because they're pretty flat in a lot of those bodies of water. And look for some of the northern bays and stuff like that. And those fish will be right, especially if you have flooded bushes. I'm not sure what the water level is down in a lot of those bodies of water. I don't know how much rain they've gotten compared to the rest of the country, but really some of the northern parts of the lake. And, you know, a lot of those guys, I mean, there's a lot of websites out there and there's a lot of forums that are really, really good as far as Texas. I'm not really sure. I know Bass Boat Central, there's forums on there. The guys talk about fishing as well as on bass boats. So, you know, just put a query out there and ask some of the guys what's been hot and where they've been catching them. Honey Hole Magazine used to be down there. I don't know if that's there anymore, but a lot of those forums that are down there, just search for some of the forums. Even in the newspapers, they have some pretty good information. So I would use that as a start. Maybe calling up some of your local tackle stores down there. You know, the Limit Fishing in Richardson, Texas. I know that's near Dallas. Those guys are great. They have one of the best catalogs and they do a very, very good job. Your local Bass Pro Shops that are down there, those guys should be full of information. I know all the Bass Pros in the country, if I'm not mistaken, Tyler, right? They all have like chalkboards and they usually have fishing reports on them.
Yes,
so,
everyone I've been to.
Ask those guys. I mean, everybody's, you know, people don't mind giving up, especially if you just want to go catch some fish. I mean, they don't mind giving up some of the areas that you need to go try.
Perfect. So another question is, what is your experience with the Ned rig in pre-spawn?
The Ned rig is awesome. Not very good around grass because it kind of gets, especially when the grass is slimy early in the season. But if you can find gravel or rocks or stuff like that, that Ned rig is awesome. I've never seen anything like. Everybody I know who's fishing it just loves it. They throw that little itty bitty, what is it, a 10th ounce or 16th ounce jig head. It's a mushroom head. Mushroom head's been around forever. And they're throwing a piece of Elastec, the Z-Man plastic that's on there, and just throw it out there, and it just kind of quivers, just kind of quivering it a little bit, and the fish just go nuts. When I was at Susquehanna Bait and Tackle today, we were talking about how good that was for the guys who were fishing for smallmouth on the Susquehanna River. And that's one of the premier fisheries in the entire country, an incredible, incredible smallmouth fishery. And the Ned rig is one of the deals that they're catching them on. When the water's high and muddy, probably not as much, but when the water gets down a little bit lower, they throw that into the eddies and just, you can throw one, as long as you don't lose your jig head, you could throw one of those Elastics, you can catch 50 fish on one. So I don't know how good that is for Z-Man, but it doesn't really matter, I guess, because they're selling the heck out of them. And there's lots of different colors I've heard that are very good as well. You know, not just your basic green pumpkin, or I know there's one green pumpkin with kind of a pearlish belly that people talk about. That's a really, really good color as well.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So we have several more questions. Do you have anything else you need to cover, or you want to just keep?
No, let's just keep doing the questions. That's fine.
Okay. So Joe says, how long do you stay on a spot, and how many lures do you throw before deciding to move?
A lot depends on whether I'm getting bit or not. If I can establish a pattern early in the day, then I'll just run that pattern and I'll stay on that spot with, you know, say I catch them on a jerkbait. Okay, so Joe and I go fishing. We go to the first spot, we catch them on a jerkbait. And we go to spot number 2, we catch them on a jerkbait, but they're not as big as we want to catch. So I'll start experimenting a little more, and I'll maybe throw a crankbait, or maybe I'll throw a spinnerbait, or I'll throw a chatterbait. And what I'll do is I'll try to get some bigger fish. I like to move when I fish, and so what I'll do is I'll revisit areas. So if I know it's a good spot, I will revisit that spot 2-3 times during the day, especially in pre-spawn, because sometimes those fish will move up later in the day as the sun gets up a little bit. When it's cloudy, I won't revisit quite as much. I'm just kind of looking for scattered fish. But when the sun comes up, then I'll go back to these spots, because if I know that those spots will hold fish, then I'll go back there and try to catch them.
Cool. Next question. So this is from Andrew in South Louisiana. He said, just about all the fish have spawned out. How would you tournament fish for big fish when the fish are scattered and it's mostly male bass biting?
Throw a big topwater right now this time of year, a big buzzbait, a big like spook walking type bait. Throw something a little bit bigger, and because those fish they don't want something little. The bigger fish don't want something little. They want a little bit bigger meal because they haven't eaten in a while, because they've been on beds. So they want something a little bit bigger. So go with something a little bit bigger. As I said, a topwater, big buzzbait, big topwater walking type bait, or a big popper, something like that. A whopper plopper. Oh my gosh. I can't tell you how many big fish I caught on a whopper plopper post-spawn last year. Big fish, smallmouth and largemouth. So for you guys largemouth fishing down there, that is a great bait. You probably catch some alligators on that too while you're out there. But that whopper plopper is an awesome bait. Just put that on. I will say, I have to go back. I do throw that on braid as well. I throw that on 50-pound braid, throw it on a pretty heavy rod. I throw the 130 size, I believe it is. And I throw either a white one or a black one. I don't get complicated with the whopper plopper. Throw it out there and just wind it in. It's amazing how many big fish will bite that bait. You might not get 10 bites in a day, but if you're tournament fishing, you need 5 bites. And that bait will get you 5 bites in a day.
Cool. So the next one is actually, I'm going to just combine two because they're asking about specific lakes. So one of them is from Charles. He wants to know about Logan Martin, and then Richard wants to know about Lake Winnipesaukee.
Winnipesaukee?
Yep. Yeah.
We don't expect you to be able to pronounce that one. We just call it Winnie.
Yeah.
We just call it Winnie.
So we got Winnie and then Lake Logan Martin. So completely different areas and two
completely different areas. Right now, they want to know right now.
Yes.
About the lake. Logan Martin, I mean, I would imagine the fish are spawning. So anywhere, they love docks on Logan Martin. I mean, you could throw docks all day long. You skip docks with jigs, brown trailer, green pumpkin type trailer. Put on a bait caster and just skip it underneath the dock. Throw a shaky head underneath the dock. Look for fish on beds. Those fish will also bite at topwater too this time of year down at Logan Martin. But Logan Martin's pretty easy. I mean, that's a lake that has a ton of fish in it and should be pretty easy to find. The flatter the points are better, and don't be scared to go back into no water at Logan Martin to find some of those fish that are in like 2-3 feet of water. Sometimes I'll use the very, very back of those docks. And don't be afraid to go in there and fish in like 2 foot of water where you don't think fish will be, because the spots will spawn back there as well as a largemouth. So dock fishing is really what I would do. I mean, that's a no-brainer there. Winnipesaukee, those fish are cold right now. So throwing a drop shot, throwing a blade bait, probably a blade bait would be the best right now. Looking for anywhere there's a funnel spot, any of the bridges that are on that lake, anywhere that it'll funnel the water down, and you have a little bit deeper water, it'll funnel the bait fish down to smelt, and you can catch some fish right now. I'm thinking of a couple different bridges that, Governor's Island. I'm thinking of some of the bridges that are up, the smaller bridges that are up in the center part of the lake towards Center Harbor. Any of those little bridges right there, those are funnel spots, and you can blade bait any of those. Go off the ends of some of those long points and just use your electronics and try to see what you see there. Any of the deeper humps that will top off at like 20 feet below the surface, those fish will be on that right now. But those fish are starting to move up. The largemouth are probably biting back into pockets. If I had to guess, you could probably catch them back into pockets, fishing a jig pretty slowly, because the water's probably real chilly back there if I had to guess. But the smallmouth should be pretty, I'm not going to say easy to catch, but you should be able, if you find them, you're going to catch a bunch.
Perfect. Just a couple more questions.
He's my most favorite lake to fish in the entire world, is Lake Winnipesaukee.
Nice. Okay, so we got, we'll do 2 more questions, then we'll close it out. But so okay. Andrew says, do you use Braid or Fluorocarbon in Florida? In Florida,
well, I'm going to give you a mixture. If I go to Florida, I didn't mention this before because I'm not there an awful lot, but when I'm fishing Florida and we're punching mats, I will use Braid, but I will put a fluorocarbon leader on. I'll put a 25-pound fluorocarbon leader, about a 3-foot leader on there. And I think I get more bites when I have that invisibility. Now, that a lot has to do with, as I mentioned before, the psychology in me. You know, it's in my eyes, I'm going to get more bites if I have fluorocarbon on there. If I'm throwing straight braid, I don't seem to get as many bites. The noise of the braid going through the cover makes me crazy. I just don't like it. If I'm fishing open water down there, I use fluorocarbon 100% of the time. I don't throw braid unless I absolutely have to. As I said, I throw it on a frog and I'll throw it on a plopper. But down there, if I can get away with throwing fluorocarbon, that's what I would prefer. I think I get more bites.
Okay, and we'll just close out with this last question from John. He said he fishes in Texas, and how do you determine where to start fishing for largemouth? Do you start shallow or go out deeper?
I start shallow just because I'm more of a power fisherman. So I usually start shallow because the shallow fish are usually active and feeding. That's the way that I look at it. There's always fish up shallow. So if you can go out there shallow and find some fish, throw in a spinnerbait, crankbait, something around hydrilla or around brush or logs or something like that, and then try to just find run that pattern and try to find more spots that are like that. Then if the fishing gets a little bit tougher and you can't find them, then back out to that next edge. You don't have to go deep. You can throw a Carolina rig in 8-10 feet of water, but there's times when throwing a Carolina rig will catch more fish than anything else in that 8 to 10 foot range.
Okay, so we do have a couple more questions. Should we close it out, or you want to?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so these two are kind of similar because one is for Carr Lake, and then one is for Lake Anna in Virginia. So North Carolina, and then Lake Anna in Virginia. Just
okay.
I guess just what's going on right now with those lakes, or what they should be doing.
Lake Anna, I would imagine. I was talking to a gentleman in New Jersey a couple of days ago, and a fish are starting to go on beds in southern New Jersey, probably on the flats. They're going on beds. So I would imagine Lake Anna, those fish are probably somewhere on beds. Just going down the lake.
Water temp is 58 mid-lake.
Water temp's 58 mid-lake. Go back in some of the creeks, back in some of the pockets, and those fish are going to be pre-spawn. I mean, maybe spawning back into pockets, but there's a lot of fish that'll be on that main lake, and you catch those fish on a crankbait or a jerkbait. That's pretty clear body of water, and those fish will react just like we were talking about with a crawdad color crankbait. Throwing a jerkbait that's more of a shad color, because Lake Anna has a pretty good shad base on it. And you should be able to catch those fish anywhere that there is a point. You're going to look for secondary points going into some of the pockets or into the creeks, and that's where those fish are going to be. They're going to be kind of moving in, looking maybe for a creek channel. If you don't have a creek channel, look for something as a secondary point, not maybe a main point in the creek, but kind of a little tiny point going in towards the back of the creek. And as far as Carr Reservoir, I know it's starting to come back. It was slow for a little bit. I think they had some kind of fish kill or disease or something on the fish, but it's starting to get a little bit better. This time of year, boy, fishing the bushes, if the water's up in the bushes, pitching lizards in bushes, throwing spinner baits, you probably can catch a whole bunch of fish doing that. And on the watercolor, throwing square bills. If the water temperature, if main lake at Lake Anna is 58, it's probably 60 or so, probably at Carr. And so you probably could catch those fish on the top water too, I would imagine. But there should be a lot of fish. And that used to be a floating worm lake. Used to throw a methiolate or a bubblegum floater or a yellow floating worm and catch a lot of fish in that body of water. I haven't fished in probably 5 or 6 years, but last time I was there was right about when it was a little bit tough. But I was there in the springtime, and we caught some nice fish fishing bushes. And we caught some fish after that. We caught them just going down the bank and throwing a floating worm out there and twitching it around. And if the fish would come up and look at it, maybe you don't bite it, then you know where they are, and you could throw back something in like a jig or a Senko or something like that and use it as a comeback bait to catch those fish.
Perfect. So we got 2 more questions. We'll kind of group them together, and then we'll close it out. So one of them is, how do you fish a blade bait? The other one is, how long should I give deep water pre-spawn smallies on a reservoir in the 50-degree, mid-50 water temp? So fishing a blade bait, and then how long should I give deep water pre-spawn smallies? So I'm not sure exactly what he's asking there, but I guess how you would tackle smallmouth in that situation.
Depending on the water temperature for the deep water smallies, let's do that one first. I'm using a blade bait to fish a lot of those deep water smallies. Blade bait, or I'm throwing a swim bait like a Kitech, and that's probably the first two baits that I would throw, especially if they're out in deep water. A lot of those fish, you know, as the water gets warmer and you have some sunny days on a lot of the reservoirs, those fish will start moving up and they'll start suspending. And that's when you can really catch them good on a jerkbait. So those fish will maybe be down 10, 15 feet over 25, 30 feet of water. So you can catch those fish on a jerkbait, especially if the water's clear. If you're throwing a blade bait, the way that I throw it on a bait caster. I use 10-pound test. Those usually come with a snap, so I use a snap on it, and I throw it out there. I don't fish it in big, large hops. I'm usually fishing anywhere from 3 inches to 9 inches off the bottom, and just little small hops, kind of fishing it like a worm. All I want to do is feel the bait vibrate. When I feel it vibrate, then I let it fall back down. When I feel it vibrate, let it fall back down. I can't tell you how many times they've picked it up right off the bottom. It's amazing with the blade bait what they will do. What you're doing is you're just trying to attract the fish and make sure that they can see it. Now, a blade bait does not work great in really dirty water, but if you have stained water, it'll work because they're keen on the vibration. Clear water, it works great. And don't be afraid to throw some of the blade baits that are painted now, because there's painted white ones. There's ones that are painted like a perch. They're painted like a bluegill. Those are pretty cool. And take a look at those blade baits. A lot of the different companies make them, not just Silver Buddy, Blitz Baits. Oh goodness, there's so many different ones out there. And go to, you go to your local Bass Pro Shops. When I was down at Susquehanna Bait and Tackle today, they had a whole like 4-foot area of just blade baits that the guys have been using. So they use it on the river as well. So all the different bodies of water, and try to get something a little bit different than your basic silver buddy or your basic gold silver buddy. Throw something a little bit different, and don't be afraid to throw painted blades at all. I didn't even get into throwing painted blades for spinner baits, but a white and chartreuse War Eagle spinnerbait, one blade white, one white blade chartreuse with a coleslaw colored skirt is absolutely deadly. I always have one in the boat, and I throw it a lot pre-spawn. I will throw it summertime. I will throw it in the fall, especially in the fall. Boy, it is really a fish catcher. But I didn't even get into that. But anyway, excuse me. So that's it.
Good. So great questions, everybody. Again, thanks to Bass Pro Shops for sponsoring this webinar. Thanks to Terry for hosting it. And, great questions. And if you have any follow-up questions, you can submit them on the Facebook page to Navionics if they're related to Navionics. But again, thank you for all attending.
Thank you very much.
All right. Bye, everyone.